Right, we're joined on this Google Hangout today by two gentlemen. We're going to be discussing an issue that is not new to Missouri, but it's been brought into more light recently with the release in the last week or so of Jeff Mizanskey, who was the only man serving life in prison in Missouri for marijuana-related offenses under a sentencing law that the legislature struck down after he was sentenced. And Governor Nixon commuted his sentence in May, and that gave him a chance at parole. He was recently paroled. And Mr. Mizanskey and others have since then been talking about whether Missouri's marijuana laws need to be looked at further, whether there needs to be decriminalization, whether there needs to be a lessening of penalties. And the comment has been made by some that there are others in Missouri prisons that perhaps don't need to be there. That's what we're going to be discussing today. And we're going to discuss that with two gentlemen. I'll start, since I referenced Mr. Mizanskey, I'll start with his attorney. Dan Viets was the attorney for Jeff Mizanskey. I guess I should say and is also with Show-Me Cannabis. Mr. Viets, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Mike.
And let me also introduce then Jason Grellner. I've met Mr. Grellner several times. He's a lieutenant with the, is it Morgan County? Not Morgan County.
Franklin County.
Franklin County. Morgan didn't sound right. I apologize. But Franklin County Sheriff's Department. But I've known him more as speaking for the Missouri Narcotics Association and testifying on many issues before the state legislature, as has Mr. Viets. And thank you, too, for your time.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.
Again, let me start just with the release again. Even as you and as the three of us speak in the last week of Mr. Mizanskey, Mr. Viets, I'll start with you, and let's talk a little bit about the laws that were in place that he was sentenced under, and what happened to those laws, just by way of background.
The so-called prior and persistent drug offender law was repealed by the legislature last year as part of the general overhaul of the criminal code. I worked on the Missouri Bar Committee that drafted that bill. It becomes effective January 2017, so technically that law is still on the books, and somebody could still be sentenced, as Jeff Mizanskey was, to life in prison without possibility of parole for marijuana offenses only. And Jeff's were relatively small marijuana offenses. He served over 21 years of that sentence before, through a persistent effort, both in the legislature and through the general public, we persuaded the governor, as you said, to commute his sentence, and the parole board to actually grant him parole. No one should go to prison for marijuana. That's the position of Show-Me Cannabis and of Normal, who I also work with. No adult who uses marijuana responsibly should be threatened with imprisonment for doing so. 4 states have recognized that fact. 4 states have legalized marijuana. They are realizing a bonanza in new tax revenue, and are saving a great deal of tax revenue which would otherwise be wasted on marijuana law enforcement. The primary impact of marijuana prohibition enforcement is to keep the prices high, to serve as a price support program for marijuana, and to ensure that drug dealers don't pay 1 penny in taxes. We want to change that.
All right, let me go to Jason then. And Jason, let's start off from the same point, and just your thoughts on what happened with Mr. Mizanskey and with the laws that he was sentenced under, but then kind of bring us into the present day, how you view the same general points that Mr. Viets was discussing.
Certainly. You know, he was sentenced under a law, basically what we call the 3-strike law. I would beg to disagree slightly with some of the comments that were made by Mr. Viets regarding, you know, relatively small amounts. These were distribution amounts. These were felonies. Mr. Mizanskey was not put in prison because he was found on 3 different occasions to be in possession of a couple of joints. These were distribution felonies that he was convicted on. They were 3 separate occasions. These weren't 3 cases put together. But I think what we need to look at in the Department of Corrections is what we're doing with addicts. You know, a recent study that came out shows that nearly 80% of all offenders abuse drugs or alcohol. And while we have individuals in our prison system as a captive audience, we need to be doing a much better job of rehabilitating offenders, helping them deal with the disease of addiction, and not setting them up for failure when they're released from prison. And as far as this bonanza of money that will come from the taxes on marijuana, I would just point to Colorado and say, you know, after their passage of recreational use of marijuana, which is still illegal under federal law, there was supposed to be this windfall of taxes in the form of excise tax on marijuana. The battle cry was for $40 million of that excise tax right off the top to go to schools. And in 2 years' time, that tax has struggled to even reach $26 million in 2 years' time. At its current rate of growth, it'll take at least 3 years just to get to what we were told they would get in 1 year's time. So what we do when we legalize marijuana is that we allow more people to have access to a very addictive drug at this time.
You know, the fact is that no
let
one.
Let me follow up on one point there before we move on, because I just want to be clear. Do you have a problem with Jeff Mizanskey being released? Should he still be in prison, or was a life sentence too long for what he was convicted of? In your opinion, Jason?
In my opinion, I won't armchair quarterback it. I wasn't there for any of the 3 cases. I wasn't there for the prosecution. I don't know the exact amounts or what else was involved in those crimes and what may have been plea bargained away during those cases. I will say that 21 years is quite a long period of time to spend in prison. I've worked numerous large-scale cases involving kilos and multi-kilo pounds of other drugs, and I've seen individuals get 4 and 5 life terms, and I've seen individuals get off with 5 and 7 year terms. So I think that the courts looked at, hopefully, looked at Mr. Mizanskey's criminal background and made an appropriate, or what they felt to be an appropriate sentence at that time. And if it was reviewed 21 years later under current standards, that he received what is just and right.
I think, and there's more to this, I think, than just, are we going to decriminalize marijuana in Missouri? I think some people would say that there are other points before we get to decriminalization where we reduce penalties. But I think both of you are kind of leaning towards, let's start with that discussion, first of all, is whether or not Missouri should just decriminalize marijuana altogether. And let me go back to Mr. Viets, since Jason got to speak quite a bit there. Is Missouri ready for that?
Yes, Missouri should legalize marijuana. The term decriminalize means different things to different people. Missouri should do as Colorado has done, regardless of what the numbers are, and they are substantially higher than what Mr. Grellner just said. The fact is that good people's lives are no longer being disrupted by the threat of criminal prosecution and imprisonment. The fact is that people who are engaged in marijuana commerce, for the most part, and I've represented them for 30 years, are nice people. They're not a threat to anybody. They haven't committed acts of violence. For the most part, they're very good people, and I've, again, represented hundreds of such people over the past 30 years. There's no reason, it makes no sense to continue the same mistakes we made with alcohol in the 1920s and early 30s. Mr. Grellner makes the point that many people in prison have been involved with alcohol and other drugs. We don't put people in prison for the responsible use of alcohol. We should not put people in prison for the responsible use or manufacture or distribution to adults of marijuana.
And Jason, same question to you. Where are you on the possibility of Missouri just making marijuana legal? Could the state handle that?
No, it couldn't. The state's not ready. Colorado wasn't ready. The states that have attempted legalization weren't ready. They weren't ready with how they were going to control it. They weren't ready with how government was going to be involved with this taxation, what kind of bureaucracy was going to be built around this. And certainly society's not ready for it. We're not, Mr. Viets mentioned alcohol and the fact that it was a dismal failure, a prohibition of alcohol in America in the 1920s. But that was after years and years and years of alcohol being legal. This is a substance that is illegal. This is a substance that when people are asked, the number one reason why they don't use marijuana is because it's illegal. When you take away the legality of marijuana, you make it legal, you're going to get more users. He talked about the responsible use. Well, we all know the detriment of alcohol when it's not used responsibly. Why would we add another chemical to the list of items that can be used irresponsibly? What social good does this have? And you can't tax it enough. When you look at the taxation in America on alcohol and on tobacco products, and the 100-fold cost to society on both of those products, why would we add another product there for society that is going to cost good taxpayers more money and never be able to pay for itself. We need to center ourselves on what we're doing in the Department of Corrections, not only here in the state of Missouri, but across the United States, and hone in on if we really want to make an effect on crime across America. And we know that 80% of individuals in prison have a drug and alcohol problem. Then while we have them as a captive audience, while they're paying their debt to society for breaking laws, which is what citizens want, they want to know that we live in a nation that is bound by rules, and if you break those rules, that there is that you have to pay for your crime. Then we want to make sure the second thing that they want is that that crime doesn't get committed again. And if these crimes are being committed because of the disease of addiction, we really need to come together as a society and work to make sure that people are able to control that disease. And what we don't need is to legalize a drug like marijuana, which is going to spread the disease faster.
Mike, the fact is that marijuana is with us. It has always been with us. Since prehistoric times, people have used marijuana. It is going to continue to be with us. We don't have the choice of whether or not people are going to use marijuana. We have a choice about how society responds to it. If Mr. Grellner thinks alcohol prohibition was a success, I assume he's advocating a return to alcohol prohibition. But that is a very, very small percentage of Americans who think that alcohol prohibition was a success. Most of us recognize that alcohol prohibition exacerbated the problems that already existed. People didn't stop drinking during liquor prohibition, but they suffered far worse consequences. Prohibition makes drugs more dangerous, not less so. During alcohol prohibition, there were forms of alcohol being made which caused people to go blind, to be crippled, or to outright die. We get far more dangerous forms of drugs when they are illegal, when there's no regulation, when there's no taxation. We have far less problems with marijuana. Colorado right now has far less problems. There's no evidence of a big increase in marijuana use in Colorado. In fact, teenage use is down. Fatal auto accidents are down, and crime in general is down since Colorado has legalized marijuana.
Since the legalization of marijuana, I keep seeing stories, though, about marijuana that is making it into the hands, or shall we even say digestive systems, of people who don't intend to use it. It's baked into brownies and kids get a hold of it, things like that. Aren't we creating an additional problem there?
No, those are rare, very rare anecdotal incidents. Certainly kids get hold of alcohol, but no one advocates, as far as I've heard, very few people advocate we return to alcohol prohibition just because some underage people use alcohol.
Lieutenant Grellner, do a lot of the problems that we have today with the overcrowding of prisons and the amount of tax dollars that go into prosecution, into arrests, into investigations, don't a lot of those go away if we legalize marijuana?
Certainly not. I mean, let's look at arrests, just pure arrests for alcohol and marijuana. In 2008, there were 2.7 million arrests for alcohol-related crimes. Okay, this is not a prohibition on alcohol. And it doesn't include crimes of violence. This is just violations of liquor laws and driving under the influence. In the same year's time in the United States, there were only 847,000 arrests, marijuana-related complete, whether that was possession cases or distribution cases. Prohibition does work. We saw since the Just Say No campaign a continued downfall of use of all illegal drugs, and marijuana included, until we started to see the term medical marijuana and states turning to legislative actions to say what are safe and affordable and effective drugs in the United States instead of turning to science. And then we started to see the upswing in the use of marijuana and other drugs. And, to say that we've had marijuana since the beginning of time, we've also had heroin. Poppy plants have been growing on this planet since the beginning of time, and has have coca plants. So I'm wondering if Mr. Viets is advocating for the legalization of all drugs, and we could do away with pharmacies and pharmacists, and people would just use whatever they want, whenever they want. To say that traffic fatality accidents are down in Colorado is misleading also. They're down all over the United States. We drive much safer cars now with seatbelt laws, with crumple zones, with side impact airbags. What he's not telling you is the 600% increase in those that are still dying on Colorado highways that are testing positive for marijuana at the time of their death. He's not telling you about the increase in use among kids in Colorado schools. And that was just during the time when it was medical marijuana. We're just into the new age of marijuana, but the exponential expulsions of kids from schools in Colorado for use. Imprisonment alone has little effect on drug abuse. 60 to 80% of drug abusers commit a new crime after release from prison. And again, I'm just going to continue to go back to what we need to be talking about is how we treat the disease of addiction, how we help people to get well, how we make sure that they're not going to reoffend. And proliferating another drug on the streets in the name of taxation, in the name of freedom, doesn't get that done for us.
Mr. Viets, I want to spin off of what he just said. He's referenced a couple of times treatment for addiction, treatment for those who have problems. Is that something that your organization supports, or do you consider it a problem that needs to be treated?
I think there are very few, if any, people who are truly addicted to marijuana, but those who are addicted, whether it's to tobacco, the most dangerous and addictive drug in our society, or alcohol, or other drugs, certainly they should be treated. They should have treatment available as an option. They should not be threatened with prison in order to get them treatment. I certainly agree with the statement that we should base our public policy on science, and anyone who knows anything about marijuana, alcohol, and tobacco has no doubt about which one is least harmful, and that is marijuana. Alcohol and tobacco are terribly dangerous and addictive drugs, yet we know from experience that criminal prohibition makes those problems worse. It does not help. That's the same with marijuana.
What about the slippery slope argument? If we illegalize, or if we make marijuana legal, that the call will then be to move on to some of the other drugs that today are considered controlled?
Well, I think that we need to take these substances one at a time and evaluate each of them independently. You know, the legalization of alcohol in 1932 did not appear to lead to a rush to the legalization of other drugs. I don't think legalizing marijuana has led to any rush to legalize other drugs in Oregon, Colorado, Washington, or Alaska, so I doubt we're going to see any similar phenomenon here.
I want to, and we've been talking primarily again about just making marijuana legal, but as we've mentioned before, there are other discussions that take place of simply lessening the penalties, lessening some of the sentences. Again, the comment has been made that there are people who are in Missouri prisons that perhaps shouldn't be for various marijuana offenses. And I want to start this conversation with Lieutenant Grellner. What about your position on that? Should we be looking at reducing sentences?
Again, well, first off, let's talk about who's really in prison for marijuana crimes. It's less than 1/10% of all prisoners throughout the United States, and that's an indisputable fact. It's less than 1/10%. What we need to look at is we're already reducing sentences for good time in prison. We have prison overcrowding problems throughout the United States. We have budgetary woes throughout the United States. You had the state of California that in 1 year's time released somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 prisoners who were termed as nonviolent drug offenders. You had the state of Illinois that released 3,000 prisoners at one time that were termed as nonviolent drug offenders. And that's another term that I have a problem with. Do we believe that individuals are born either violent drug offenders or nonviolent drug offenders? Their disease dictates how they will end up. I've seen numerous nonviolent drug offenders who several years into their addiction end up being violent drug offenders. So we need to be able to treat these individuals. But again, society wants individuals to pay for their crime, and they want them not to reoffend. And warehousing individuals and hoping that the fear of being put back in prison will end this disease does not work. Things like drug courts do work. I'm a member of the drug court team here in Franklin County. I've been to both the state and the national convention, and I know that we can assist and, if you will, force individuals into rehabilitation and into helping themselves before they hit rock bottom, or as we've seen now in the devastating era of heroin across the United States and prescription drug abuse, which is now the #1 cause of accidental death in the United States. We can help these people deal with their disease, live with their disease, and become productive members of society and drop overall crime rates.
May I reply?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, what you wanted to rebut.
The Journal of the American Medical Association published a study recently which demonstrates that in those 23 states where the use of marijuana as medicine has been legalized, that death from prescription opiate overdose and from non-prescription opiate overdose has dropped dramatically from 20 to 33%. And the longer medical marijuana has been available, the greater the reduction in opiate overdose death. So that's what the science says, is that legalizing medical marijuana reduces death from opiate overdose. Mr. Grellner is correct that pharmaceutical drugs are perhaps the most dangerous and deadly drugs we have. Many people who seek pain relief through the use of true narcotic drugs, pharmaceutical pain relievers, discover that cannabis greatly reduces their need for those deadly, addictive narcotics. And so it's difficult to understand why anyone would oppose making medical marijuana available under a doctor's supervision and with his authorization.
Because
Go ahead.
Because doctors can't authorize it in the United States. When you look at the states that have gone to medical marijuana or legalization, doctors cannot prescribe marijuana even in those states because they'll lose their DEA number and their ability to prescribe any other controlled substances. What you end up with is marijuana experts, and that is a very loose term, I might add, who are advocating or helping individuals find what they believe to be medical marijuana, which, by the way, that there is no science, there is no FDA oversight. You don't know what you're getting when you're going into these stores. And we're getting card holders in California and Colorado. That over 80% of these individuals are white males between the ages of 17 and 35 with no history of chronic illness and a history of alcohol and drug use. What we're seeing happen is two things. One is we are seeing a decrease in prescription drug abuse across the United States at the current time because of re-educating doctors and working with law enforcement that seems to be at the same time coinciding with an uptick in marijuana use. But the other thing you're seeing is if individuals, as Mr. Viets is saying, is turning away from opium towards marijuana, it's just drug substitution.
Yes.
It's not one is any better than the other one.
That is an interesting statement, to say that marijuana is no better than narcotic drugs, which are both highly addictive, have horrible side effects, and frequently result in death. No human being has ever been shown to have died from the toxic effects of marijuana in the history of the human race. To fail to recognize that marijuana is a far less dangerous substance in any meaningful sense of that word than narcotics, than opiate drugs, that is just irrational.
It's not irrational. It flies right into the face of what you said a few minutes ago, in that tobacco use is much more dangerous than marijuana use. Name the last person that smoked a Marlboro and keeled over dead. It is the long-term effect of tobacco use that kills individuals, and the same as with marijuana. And we can also see from reports in California of medical examiners terming marijuana as the cause of death, and all of the individuals that are being killed on roadways that are testing positive for marijuana at the time of their death. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that this is a benign substance that causes no problems, and then say that tobacco is this horrible, horrible drug that's much worse than marijuana.
Yes, you can. You can say exactly that because it's true.
Let me bring this back and pose the original question. I could listen to you guys go back and forth all day, but let me pose the original question again back to Mr. Viets, and that is regarding, if not simply making marijuana legal in Missouri, some lessening again of the penalties that have put many people in prison. Is that enough for you?
No, that's not enough, but it's an important step in the right direction. The legislature has already done that. Under the legislation I referred to earlier, the Missouri Bar Criminal Code revision, which was passed by our General Assembly in 2014, the penalties for marijuana distribution and the penalties for marijuana sales have been reduced. Also under that same law, there will be no jail as a penalty for first offense possession of very small amounts of marijuana. These are steps in the right direction. They are not sufficient. They do not solve the fundamental problems that marijuana prohibition causes. Most of the problems identified with marijuana use are actually problems which are caused or exacerbated by marijuana prohibition, by the fact that it is a criminal a crime to produce or to sell marijuana or to distribute it. Do you realize under current Missouri law, it's a felony offense to even attempt to sprout a single seed? It's a felony offense to share a joint. That can be charged, and I've seen it charged as distribution, a Class B felony, 5 to 15 years under current law. There are extremely harsh criminal penalties for marijuana for marijuana under current Missouri law. They're going to continue, even under the revised criminal code, to be very harsh penalties. You know, our country has only 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's prisoners right now. Our country relies entirely too heavily on imprisonment as a consequence of law violations. And indeed, there are 20,000 people arrested in Missouri each year for marijuana offenses. Most of them are very small ones.
Let me come back to Mr. Viets to come back to this final point that I want to discuss, and that is maybe the most important one, at least in my mind, is the reality of what might actually change, if anything. As you said, we've just had the criminal code revision completed. In this current environment, you have a Republican-controlled legislature, you have a Democrat governor who's a former attorney general, a chance that you could have another former attorney general, Democrat governor, in office. But that brings me to my next point, is we have a fresh round of elections next year, so the landscape could change significantly. My point being, either in the near future or the foreseeable future, what is the chance that any of this actually changes, that there is serious discussion of further changes of penalties, or that there is serious discussion of making marijuana legal in Missouri? And because you're the one that wants to see it illegalized in this of my two guests, I'm going to start with you with that.
Indeed, there has been and there will continue to be very serious discussions about how legalization should be accomplished in the state of Missouri. There have been bills introduced in the Missouri General Assembly to eliminate marijuana prohibition. There will be additional bills filed in the near future. What's very clear is there is broad bipartisan support for marijuana law reform. Our legislature, for instance, last year also passed a bill that makes an extract of marijuana called cannabidiol, CBD, available for doctors to prescribe, for doctors to authorize, I should say, not technically prescribe, and that is just the beginning. It's a very important measure. It's going to help a lot of very young people, children, to have access to something which will at least lengthen, if not save, their lives. And the fact that a bipartisan coalition in the Missouri General Assembly passed that law unanimously in the Senate, and with 90% of House members joining in, that is a harbinger of things to come.
And Jason, let me come back to you with the same general question. And do you think that the passage of that law regarding cannabinoid oil, is that a harbinger of things to come?
No, and you saw that last year. The cannabidiol law was actually passed 2 sessions ago. Last year there was an attempt to pass a medical marijuana law, which, although made it out of committee, never made it to the House floor and was never introduced on the Senate side. You go back 3 or 4 years to the last time that there was an attempt made at a signature campaign to get it on the ballot initiative for the legalization of marijuana. Those on that side never even got close to the number necessary to get it onto the ballot. Missouri is known as the show-me state. They're waiting, taking a wait-and-see look at what's going on in the other states. We're hearing the evidence of what is going on in Colorado. We're going to see what goes on in the state of Washington. This is not the tax windfall. This is not the end of crime that they constantly tell us it's going to be. Again, this is, no matter what anyone wants to say, this is the gateway drug. I've been on the drug court team. I've talked to thousands, if not tens of thousands of individuals who are dealing with the disease of addiction, and to a person. They started their track with marijuana and or alcohol before they ended up on heroin, before they ended up in prescription drugs, before they ended up anywhere. They started with that drug. And we need to make sure that we're not opening the door for more disease. This is just like any other disease. The disease of addiction is just like any other disease. We know what causes it, and opening the door to have the ability to get to this drug, this opens the door for a wider range of disease. We need to be taking the money that we have, using it wisely, teaming rehabilitation with how people access their ability to get out of jail sooner, so that we know that when they leave the Department of Corrections, they have the ability to live meaningful, productive lives and keep their disease in check.
If there is a so-called gateway drug, it is indeed alcohol, and I again assume that Mr. Grellner is advocating a return to liquor prohibition. That would be the only consistent conclusion to draw from his argument.
Let me take final thoughts from each of you. Since I gave Mr. Viets the opening word, I'll give Lieutenant Grellner the last word. So let's start with you, Mr. Viets. Just final thoughts.
Well, my final thoughts are that we're going to see continuing measures to reform the marijuana laws. We're working hard, and we need help from others who understand and agree that the marijuana prohibition is a total failure, that it doesn't help anyone, that we should not be treating adults who use marijuana responsibly as if they were criminals any more than we treat people who make beer in their homes as if they were criminals, or people who sell beer to other adults as if they were criminals. We should regulate and tax marijuana like alcohol. And we are indeed learning the lessons of what's happening in other states. The experience with marijuana legalization in those other states has largely, in fact, almost exclusively been positive so far.
Lieutenant Grellner, your final thoughts.
Prohibition does work. At the current time, about 52% of Americans indulge in alcohol, 26.7 Americans use tobacco of some sort, and only about 7.3% of Americans indulge in marijuana use. So prohibition does work. No matter how many times people say prohibition doesn't work, it does work. I'm not advocating to go back to prohibition of alcohol. You can trace alcohol's roots all the way back to the Bible. Jesus turned water into wine. He didn't turn wheat into weed. And so people have, even in their religion, a basis for the use of alcohol. They don't have the same for marijuana, and there's no reason to reduce the prohibition on marijuana. There is a founded reason to make sure that those that are addicted and those that are using marijuana find treatment, and safe and effective treatment, so that they don't reoffend.
Gentlemen, I imagine this is a debate that we'll hear several more times, and probably in the coming legislative session, but I appreciate you both taking the time to talk to me about it today. And again, Mr. Viets, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lear.
And Lieutenant Grellner, thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Viets.
This has been Mike Lear of Missouri Net.